5 states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Oregon, all at high risk of election-related militia violence. That's according to a study by Militia Watch and the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. But who are these groups? NBC News correspondent Cal Perry got rare access to the leaders of this growing movement.
Self-described militias are becoming a regular sight on the streets of many American cities, often dressed head to toe in military fatigues, often with firearms strapped to their chest.
We are security and we do uphold constitutional rights for people, whether that's, I tell people this a lot of the times, whether that's our constitutional rights or others.
Nick Alsager leads the group BEAR, Brothers on Equal Amendment Rights.
Do you think that's inciting, standing on the street with a...
No, because you got to remember, you have the right to hold a weapon no matter what. I think it's people making an assumption based on what they believe.
We tried that earlier, but they separated.
We've seen you out in Frankfurt, in Louisville. Why does your group come out on the streets?
To make sure everything remains peaceful when they're out there protesting.
Tara Brandow is the leader of another militia that she says has over 80 members. We've seen them outside Kentucky's Capitol, heavily armed at rallies against COVID restrictions and on the edge of demonstrations for Breonna Taylor.
We don't want the towns burnt down. We don't want anybody shooting each other.
But law enforcement says a militia presence makes their job more difficult.
It does not help the situation. It only exacerbates the situation.
The police are doing all they can, but they got their hands tied and a lot of people against them.
Guys, we've got to keep our composure. You understand? We cannot put our hands on somebody like that.
And the increased presence of these militias has led many in the city to take precautions.
Justice! Now! We have the Revolutionary Black Panther Party who is doing our security.
Are you worried about the presence of militias in Kentucky?
I'm definitely worried about the presence of militias in Kentucky, especially since the legislative body that I serve in voted to allow people to open carry without a permit. Our legislative body has been very clear that it supports institutional and systemic racism. It's sending the message to these white militias that you're welcome here in Kentucky.
Do you think that some of these white militia groups are racist?
Well, some are, and some of the black groups are racist, too. I don't vouch for either one of them.
Southern Poverty Law Center has photos of you carrying Confederate flags. Some people say that's racist.
Well, some people say it's racist. Some people don't. People in my group are Puerto Rican, blacks, Cubans. I've got a mixture.
These groups so visible now that this became a defining moment of the first debate.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
So you thought it did kind of speak to your group?
I think it did.
Other groups.
I think it did. And I think the reason why he said to, stand back and stand by was, he sees it the same way.
And like many, he fears the election could bring unrest.
Are we talking civil war? Because people say civil war in these groups all the time.
I think that's a possibility. I think it's probably a really close possibility. And though most people will try to make it a black and white thing, I don't think it's a black and white thing. It's a right and left thing.
Cal Perry joins us now from Lansing, Michigan. Cal, do we have any sense of how many of these militias are out there and who specifically is joining them?
Yeah, we do. The Southern Poverty Law Center is tracking 181 of them. There could be more, of course. Those are the ones that they have identified. As for who is joining them, I have to tell you, the coronavirus has been an absolute boost and a boon for the recruitment on these militias, especially when you listen to the way the president talks about these lockdowns as though they are a breach of liberty. That attracts a lot of people to these groups, Allison.
Cal, let's talk about the thread that links all of them. Is there one particular or central connective thread or belief that runs through all of these groups? And are all or most of them Trump supporters?
It's interesting. I would say most of them are sort of a libertarian view that they think government should not be a part of their lives. That's why you see them standing out on the streets. But no, they don't agree on a lot of things. Those armed group members we spoke to, they condemned the plot against the governor of Michigan here. They said they don't support Trump. But that said, in the past, when you have these militia groups, and most of them are libertarian, there's usually no connection to the president. There are a large number of groups who do side with President Trump, Allison.
All right, Cal Perry in Michigan, thanks so much. Residents of Kenosha, Wisconsin have dealt with everything from COVID to violence in their streets. The area is so in focus that both President Trump and Joe Biden have made campaign stops there. NBC News political reporter Shaq Brewster tells us what's top of voters' minds in Kenosha as they head to the polls.
A swing county in an even bigger battleground state. Struck by riots and reeling from the devastation. In the middle of a global public health crisis. Kenosha, Wisconsin, the only Kenosha in America, but its story is one that has become all too familiar in recent months. Following the shooting of Jacob Blake, protesters took to the streets in late August to fight against police brutality. But the situation soon turned dangerous when a group of rioters set the city on fire. Police later said over half of those arrested were from out of town. Uptown Kenosha was hit hardest.
Well, it was scary. Really, unbelieving at some of the stuff that was going on. 75% of the problem of the devastation was in Uptown.
Paul owns the Steampunk General Store.
Take a 100-year-old novel, get Tim Burton to do his weird stuff on it, that's steampunk.
His store was just less than 100 feet from where the fire stopped.
This is an old building here that burned, during the riots, and we got a couple around the back of the store that also burned during the riots.
Since the riots, the influx of customers to the area has dropped significantly, affecting the businesses that are still left standing. One of those is Sugarbox Play Space, a children's play area and ice cream store just 2 doors down from Paul.
This entire area for the stores that did survive, you might as well had gotten hit because you really weren't seeing any business. No one really came for about the next almost 2 weeks. The riots tore away half the city, and the COVID is hurting the other half that usually help uplift or that would have uplifted the people who were hurt from the riots.
In the 2012 election, Kenosha County went blue by 13 percentage points. In 2016, it flipped and went red by 1. Both candidates made it a point to visit Kenosha following the unrest. President Trump visited the areas of devastation and small business owners affected by the riots. Former Vice President Biden visited the family of Jacob Blake and community leaders.
I am undecided still.
Yeah, I'm voting for Joe Biden.
So are voters here focused on the issues of race and law and order, or is COVID the leading issue in this area?
The way Trump responded to the coronavirus is ridiculous. He's trying to get rid of national insurance at a time when we're in a pandemic. It's like, that's insane. I think the COVID and the riots opened a lot of people's eyes, so they'll be voting in a way to help make things better.
But for Shari, it's not so simple.
The riots and the protests definitely don't affect my decision as far as who I'm going to choose for the election. I do not think the way that the COVID and everything was handled affects my vote either. We're all responsible for ourselves. We do as we need to maneuver. No, it's bigger than that for me. It feels like right now Kenosha is very undecided, in my opinion. Like, that's what I get from it. I've heard both sides of the spectrum.
I think we'll go blue again. I hope so. It's hard to tell. The other day there was a Trump parade going by, a bunch of people in the cars with flags.
In the meantime, there's still a crisis to survive.
The surge in Wisconsin for the COVID cases is, you can definitely see the effects. It feels like everyone's asleep. It's just been so quiet.
President Trump ramping up his law and order messaging and positioning himself as hard on crime. But what is his record, and does his rhetoric match up with reality? NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce takes a look.
I am the law and order candidate. I am your president of law and order.
Since the start of his political career, President Trump has made the case that he's tough on crime. But does the rhetoric match the reality? In 2016, Trump's Law and Order campaign focused on a range of issues, like securing the border, cracking down on gangs, and supporting law enforcement.
America's police and law enforcement personnel are what separates civilization from total chaos and the destruction of our country as we know it.
Once he became president, he made more military equipment available to police and demanded harsher penalties for those who harm officers. He also established a national commission on law enforcement, though a judge recently ordered that group to stop working because it didn't hold public meetings and it lacked diverse perspectives. And as millions demonstrated against police brutality across the country, the president maintained his tough-on-crime approach. He cleared this overwhelmingly peaceful protest after vowing to use the military to control the unrest. And while he ultimately signed an executive order creating a national database to track police misconduct, he implied it wasn't a widespread issue.
Nobody is more opposed to the small number of bad police officers, and you have them. They're very tiny. I use the word tiny. It's a very small percentage.
The Justice Department has also complemented the president's agenda. It awarded nearly $400 million in funds for community policing and law enforcement jobs. And Attorney General Barr recently announced more than 5,500 people were arrested as part of Operation Legend, a new program designed to curb crime in major cities.
Violent crime can be addressed if we have the will to do it.
But it's worth noting something here. While the majority of Americans believe crime is on the rise, the reality is crime has been consistently dropping for decades.
They plummeted during the Bush administration, they plummeted during the Obama administration, and they have continued to fall during the Trump administration.
That is until this year. When it comes to the worst crimes, David Skalansky is a law professor at Stanford. He explained while crime is down overall this year, several cities are reporting an uptick in shootings and homicides. Trump has put some of the blame on recent civil unrest. But it's happening in both Democratic and Republican cities, and it's a bit more complicated.
Many of these things have to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that people have been stuck at home may be increasing rates of domestic violence. The fact that hospitals are overwhelmed may have made some assaults that previously would not have been deadly assaults. The fact that the pandemic has caused the economy to go into a tailspin may be responsible for some of the increase in homicide.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden has tried flipping the script on this and asking voters if they feel safe in Donald Trump's America.
This is a sitting president of the United States of America. He's supposed to be protecting his country, but instead he's rooting for chaos and violence.
Biden has touted his record as vice president, claiming violent crime fell 15% under the Obama administration. FBI data does show violent crime dropped almost 16% compared to the year Obama was elected, though the murder rate stayed about the same. But it's debatable whether the executive branch can actually change the crime rate.
Crime is mostly a local problem, and it is addressed locally and at the state level in the United States. Presidents, nonetheless, have a fair bit of power to influence how criminal justice policies are carried out across the United States.
One notable policy from the Trump administration is the First Step Act, often referred to as the most significant criminal justice reform bill of the 21st century. So far, it's shortened sentences and helped release thousands from prison. Joe Biden also says he wants to reduce incarceration rates and address racial disparities within the judicial system. Some say he's come a long way on this, considering he supported the 1994 crime bill that contributed to an increase in the prison population. Though he certainly hasn't endorsed every progressive policy idea.
I've never, ever supported defunding police. Matter of fact, I think we should give more funding to police for different reasons.
When it comes to combating future violence, Biden wants to prioritize prosecuting hate crimes, whereas President Trump says he will, quote, bring violent extremist groups like Antifa to justice. But at the end of the day, many Americans just don't consider crime a major issue right now. Instead, they're more focused on coronavirus, poor leadership in government, and the economy. Whether crime matters as much as it has in past elections will be up to the voters to decide in the coming days.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.